Right, so let me get started and welcome everyone. This is, I'm Peter Hughes, the chair of the London Division, and welcome to this meeting, the London Division Discover Psychiatry event. And we're really happy for you all to join. And for any of you, for those of you who may not be familiar with the London Division, we're the representation of the College of Psychiatrists for London. And the Choose Psychiatry group is one of the really great parts of the London division is how enthusiastic this group has become, which is about promoting psychiatry as a career. And it's mainly led by trainees, medical students, foundation doctors, and who have led on this whole meeting. So really happy to have you all here for this. Um, when we have face-to-face, we usually end with wine and nibbles at the end. So we'll just have to have that in a virtual sense this time. But starting off, just some practical things. On the right-hand side, you'll see the chat box. And please put in any questions for the speakers there and indicate who you want the question directed to. Please tweet throughout the day using Choose Psychiatry or tagging the RC Psych London. And thanking all the speakers and all my colleagues, Jen, Edwards, and all for having worked so hard to set this meeting up. With that, I'm going to hand over to Zain Ahmed to chair and carry on with the proceedings. So I hope you have a good evening.
All right, thank you very much, Peter. I'm Zain. I'm a second-year medical student at King's, and I'm also part of the Choose Psychiatry group. So just to start things off here, we're going to go in with another poll for you guys. So when that's ready. Okay, so we're just waiting on the poll. But yeah, basically, we're just going to ask you, what is your preferred specialty in psychiatry? So if you guys could go ahead and vote now, please. Okay, so it looks like we're most of the way there, and yeah, we're seeing a real trend here of general adult and adolescent psychiatry. You guys will see the results in a bit. I'm just going to introduce our first speaker now, which is Dr. Trudy Senaviratna. She is the registrar of Royal College of Psychiatrists, and she has been since this year. She has overall responsibility for policy, public education, revalidation, and for membership engagement. She is a consultant adult and perinatal psychiatrist at SLAM and has been since 2002. And she's also the clinical director for the Psychological Medicine Clinical Academic Group and the Lewisham Director at the Trust. She's an active educator. She's published and disseminated numerous research papers. And recently she was awarded an OBE for services to perinatal psychiatry and the President's Medal of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So we're I think we're just waiting on her. Is that right?
Hi, Zane, sorry, we're just still waiting on Trudy at the moment. We've just had some technical difficulties with her connecting. I guess if Peter just maybe wants to say a few more words about the division, the London division.
No worries, over to you, Peter.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jen. So just to the London division, we represent the largest number of psychiatrists for a geographical region. The college is split into divisions, and Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. So London is a hugely important division, and we have, I think, 5 medical schools in London, and we've always been very good at recruitment into psychiatry, and I think we can be proud of the training we offer in psychiatry in London. So the London division, as well as having a very big agenda on recruitment into psychiatry and retention in psychiatry. Also, we're involved in policy, standards, educational activities, and we also feel it's very important that we have our service user and carer rep as very much a core part of our committees and activities. So the service user patient voice gets heard throughout our activities. I'll be happy to answer any questions about the London division, probably at the end. And I'm just wondering, checking if any word on Trudy getting through yet? Not yet. So we have various activities throughout the year that people might be interested in. We have like an academic event. We have essay prizes that people might be interested in applying for. And we have our newsletter that comes out a couple of times a year. And the next episode, not the episode, sorry, the next edition will be focused on COVID particularly and how it's affected London. So we are always interested to hear from members about how we can do more in the London division, and really interested to hear from medical students and foundation doctors particularly as well, and in getting engaged with the London division. And as I said at the beginning, the Choose Psychiatry Committee has become a really nice way of seeing people at all stages coming together to promote psychiatry. So we have medical students, foundation doctors, psychiatrists, and people more senior than like myself, I might say. We have our Twitter that you can join, which is OrPsych London. I think that's probably all I'd like to say about the London division at this time. I do wonder if we might need to change around the timetable of the speakers. Is there anyone else that can take Trudy's place before, and we go a bit, we change the timetable a little bit? Is that possible?
I think we're about to, Peter. Just give you a second.
Hello, Zane. Any news on what's happening now?
Yep, I think we're just going to, while we wait for Trudy, I think we're just going to change our speakers around. So Dr. Ahmed Hankir is here already at the minute.
Okay.
And I'm just going to quickly introduce him. So
I'll hand back to you, Zane, and as people will understand these things, I've never had a meeting on Zoom that has gone to plan yet. So thanks, Zoom.
No. Okay, so Dr. Ahmed Hankir is a senior research fellow at the Center for Mental Health Research in association with Cambridge Uni, and academic clinical fellow in psychiatry at the IOPPN at King's. His research interests include global and Muslim mental health and pioneering and evaluating innovative programs that challenge mental health related stigma, and he's published extensively in these areas. He co-edited a textbook on Islamophobia and psychiatry with Professor Rania Awad at Stanford University, who presented her research findings on Muslim mental health to Barack Obama at the White House. He was consulted by the New Zealand government, played an instrumental role in the authorization of $1 million for research on the psychological effects of the Christchurch mosque terror attack. And he presented his research findings on Muslim perceptions of combat troops to MOD officials at Whitehall. He was also an expert reviewer for the WHO Good Practice on Community Mental Health Services, and he's a recipient of numerous awards, including the RCP Foundation Doctor and Core Psychiatry Trainee of the Year awards, which mark the highest level of achievement in psychiatry in the UK. In recognition of his services to public engagement and his education and research and scholarly outputs, he was also appointed visiting professor of academic psychiatry at the Carrick Institute for Graduate Studies in Florida. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Ahmed Hankir.
Wow, wow. Can you hear me, Zain?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much for that incredibly kind introduction. So do I just share, I'm not very tech savvy, but let me give it, so I just share my screen. Oh, rock and roll. Oh no, I got a bit carried away. So can somebody enable me so I can share my screen?
Yep, you should
when
be able
all
to.
else fails, personality prevails. So thank you to all the medical students, foundation doctors, and other people for joining us this evening. Let's see if we can, oh yes, we are making progress. Right, so, where is it? Slideshow, oh, hang on. We're getting there. Voila. Okay, so this is my journey from a service user with mental illness. Some people dislike the term service user. They prefer a patient, expert by experience. So I put kind of service user, I should put service user in inverted commas. To Royal College of Psychiatrists Core Psychiatric Trainee of the Year. Right, a bit about the title. I'm really passionate about dignifying and empowering people with mental health problems and debunking the many myths that abound. For example, that we are a drain on society, that we cannot recover, and that we will never amount to anything in life, and that we are doomed to underachievement. So I hope the title will help to dispel these myths. Now, it is interesting, to say the least, the looks on people's faces when I share that I have living experiences of mental health problems and that I received this honor from the college. And people look confused because they can't seem to reconcile the two, as if they are dichotomous. And I think it's really important for us to be brutally honest with ourselves and to engage in introspection and to identify any biases, conscious and or unconscious, and any stigma that is residing within us, and to challenge our preconceptions. Okay, so what is mental health? What is mental health? Simply put, there is no health without mental health. Mental health influences how we feel, think, talk, and behave. It influences our mood, our memory, our motivation, our modus operandi. We are utterly beholden to the power and mercy of our minds. Now, people who experience mental health difficulties often suffer and struggle terribly, so much so that our suffering and struggling can drive us to ending that which is most precious, human life itself. We know that every 40 seconds, someone, somewhere out there dies by suicide. And suicide is the biggest killer of people under 35 in the UK. Now, psychiatrists are experts at caring for people with mental illness. Now, an orthopedic surgeon mends broken bones, but a psychiatrist heals broken minds and broken hearts. And what could be more challenging? What could be more rewarding? What could be more thrilling than that? It wasn't a surgeon who saved my life. It was a psychiatrist. And it was a psychiatrist who rescued me from the depths of my own despair. Now, as psychiatrists, we get to listen to our patients' fascinating stories of adventure and misadventure, and we take a roller coaster ride across the spectrum of human emotion. There are tears of joy, there are tears of sorrow, and there is never, ever a dull moment. What does it feel like? What does it feel like to work at the coalface of psychiatry? So let's say that you are doing CPR on a patient who has had a cardiac arrest, and you notice there is a return of spontaneous circulation, and you are euphoric, understandably so. So in psychiatry, you will meet people with mental disorders, and I'm sure what I'm about to say will resonate with anyone who has lived a living experience of mental health difficulties. That, for example, if you are depressed, you can feel as though you are not living. You are existing, but you're not living. And there's a clear distinction between the two. And so, for example, when I'm taking a history from a patient, I ask, does it feel like you're living life? I don't ask that question. It wasn't in the psychiatric textbooks. I get that from my own lived experience. And almost every patient that I've met who have asked that question says, it doesn't feel like I'm living. And so people who have mental health difficulties can succumb to despair. And as psychiatrists, we formulate a treatment plan. And it is our duty to instill hope in these people. And when you see them smile after a lifetime of what it must feel like a lifetime to them of misery, I'm telling you, it is more rewarding than reviving the heart of a person who has had a cardiac arrest. Because in a sense, you are reviving their hearts in a metaphorical sense. And that is why it is such a huge pleasure and privilege to be working in psychiatry. Okay, so I want to share my true psychiatry journey with you all, and I'm going to quote Oliver Sacks. He emphatically exclaimed, in order to restore the human subject at the center, the suffering, afflicted, fighting human subject, we have to deepen a case history into a narrative or tale. What is the suffering behind the symptom? And I love this quote. This is one of my favorite books by the human rights activist Malcolm X, or Al-Malik al-Shabazz. And he said, why am I as I am? Why am I as I am? To understand that of any person, his whole life from birth must be reviewed. All of our experiences fuse into our personality. Everything that ever happened to us is an ingredient. And that's the beauty of psychiatry. We get to learn all about our patients' fascinating stories, even before they are born. We know that, for example, there are higher rates of psychosis in second-generation immigrants than there are in first-generation immigrants. Even things are happening in utero. And honestly, I can't emphasize this enough. Psychiatry is a thrilling medical specialty. So there I am. I'm 17 years old with my father in Beirut International Airport. And back then, the situation in Lebanon wasn't good. This was during the aftermath of the brutal and the bloody civil war in the 80s. And so I had to say goodbye to my family. And I look at that picture and I see a boy. I mean, legally, by definition, I'm not an adult yet. And my mind is still maturing. My brain is still developing. My heart is still expanding. And I have no idea what lies ahead of me. All I know is that I'm going to the UK, and there are high hopes for a better future. And naively, I think I'm going to be embraced by the academic community, and I'm going to waltz into medical school. But the reality is that my qualifications were not recognized, and I was a janitor cleaning floors, and I was a stock advisor stacking shelves in a supermarket for 50, 60 hours per week on minimum wage, just to survive, just to put a roof over my head and food into my stomach. And how did I feel? I felt lonely. I felt isolated. I was afraid. I saw other people my age, and they were living with their parents, and they were preparing for their A-level exams. And so, I mean, I think it's understandable that I was melancholic, but I still remained focused. And I was grateful for the many blessings that were bestowed upon me, because I was given a decent shot at life, you see. In the UK, education is a birthright. So I would admonish myself if I squandered that golden opportunity. And so the following year, I enrolled into a sixth form. I continued to work full-time hours to secure the grades that were necessary to matriculate into medical school. I dug deep. Don't ask me how I did it. I mean, I was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's pitch black outside and it's raining. And I'm taking a bus to go to Marks and Spencer's in Leeds city center. And you do a 14-hour shifts, and then you're doing a 14-hour shift the next day. Then you have to go back to sixth form on the Monday. And securing the grades to matriculate into medical school by itself is hard enough. But I was really fortunate. And yeah, my dream was starting to come true. It was always my dream to become a doctor. And life was great. Up until 2006, when I woke up one morning to discover that my hometown in Lebanon was bombed, and that hundreds of people were killed overnight. And my nightmare turned into a reality. My world turned upside down. I saw harrowing and horrific images of dead bodies strewn on the streets of Lebanon. And I reacted. Unbeknown to me, I feared that my family were among the dead, but they were evacuated by the British. But all that. So I developed a severe episode of mental illness. And C.S. Myers said in The Lancet that everyone has a breaking point. Weak or strong, cowardly or courageous, war frightened everyone ruthless. And in the immortal oratory of the Joker, insanity is much like gravity. All it takes is a little push. I love another quote from the Joker, the latest installment. The worst thing about having mental illness is that society expects for you to behave as if you don't. Cinema therapy, right there for you. So, debilitating though the symptoms of mental illness are, the stigma is far, far worse. I was ostracized, marginalized, and dehumanized by people who I thought were my closest companions. And I was forced to interrupt my studies. And I was sinking deeper and deeper into the darkness. And in extremis, I contemplated suicide. However, I resisted the urge to act upon these thoughts, since suicide is forbidden in Islam. And I am a practicing Muslim. And so remember, when you're conducting a risk assessment, that faith can be a protective factor against suicidal behaviors. I eventually sought help from my imam in my local mosque, and received treatment from my NHS psychiatrist. And I gradually recovered and resumed medical school with renewed determination and resilience. There was a fire burning in my belly, and there was a thunder in my heart. And against all the odds, I qualified. Don't ask me how I did it, but I did it. Thank God. However, I had been disempowered, ridiculed, rejected, and humiliated for so long that I was inspired to work above and beyond the call of duty. And fortunately, my hard work didn't go unnoticed. In 2013, I received the Royal College of Psychiatrists Foundation Doctor of the Year. And it was one of the most proudest moments in my life. And actually, I need to correct the title of my presentation, because this isn't my journey. This is our journey. I have met some truly compassionate and caring and empathetic people who have supported me. And it is as much their prize as it is mine. This is my mentor, Dr. Rashid Zaman. And I have really tested him. And never once has he ever lost his temper with me. And I've known him for 10 years now. And I'm not an easy guy to be around, trust me. So I really want to emphasize, this is our journey. And there's a beautiful poem from Muhammad Ali. It's, I think, the shortest poem in the world. Me, we. When you replace I with we, you get mental wellness instead of mental illness. So I noticed when I was a medical student that we didn't have any lectures on the devastating effects of mental health related stigma. And we know that stigma and a culture of shame are formidable barriers to mental health services, and many medical students with mental health difficulties continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. I have to repeat that. Many medical students with mental health difficulties continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. And that is outrageous. If that was physical health, there would be furore. And so I was inspired, and this is an example of the fatal consequences of mental health related stigma. Dr. Daksha Amson, I know Peter Hughes knows her, and many other people, many other psychiatrists know her. Brilliant psychiatrist, with bipolar affective disorder, tragically killed herself and her 3-month-old baby daughter Freya during a psychotic episode. An independent inquiry into her death concluded that she was the victim of stigma in the National Health Service. Mental health related stigma is rampant in the NHS. And so I was inspired by fellow survivors to share my recovery journey. And so we pioneered the Wounded Healer, which has been described as an innovative method of teaching that blends the power of the performing arts and storytelling with psychiatry. And the argument we make is, how can you educate an audience if you can't engage them? And the aims are to entertain, engage, and to educate, to debunk myths, challenge stigma, and encourage care seeking. It's expert, personal, and professional experience led. We coined this mnemonic, EPPE. So psychiatrists who have living experiences of mental health difficulties, because experts by experience are doing a fantastic job. And if you look at the literature, the evidence proves that the people who reduce mental health related stigma are experts by experience. But I think experts by personal and professional experience really need to show leadership, because we have experienced mental health from both sides. So this is Carl Jung, and he used the term the wounded healer as an archetypal dynamic to describe a phenomenon that may take place in the relationship between analyst and analysand. Jung discovered the wounded healer archetype in the relation to himself. For Jung, it is your own hurt which gives you your measure of your power to heal. It is your own hurt which gives you your measure of your power to heal. The deeper your wound, the more effective a healer you are. Now, make no mistake, you don't have to have lived the living experience of mental health difficulties to be an empathic psychiatrist. Of course you don't. But I'm just saying that it's not entirely negative. In fact, having living experience of mental health difficulties can actually be advantageous. So this is an essay from Dr. Claire Buckinghorn entitled Doctors Go Mad. So I'm going to read it out to you verbatim. As a psychiatrist, I had hoped that I was pretty good at empathizing with my patients. However, the last 9 months of my life has taught me more about mental illness than years of clinics, ward rounds, home visits, or reading the psychiatric literature. She was diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, detained under the Mental Health Act, and admitted onto psychiatric hospital. And if you read the autobiographical narratives of doctors who have living experiences of mental health difficulties, a recurrent theme is that they have become more insightful, that they have become more driven, and they have become more empathetic. And I can say, without a doubt, that not only has my living experience of mental health difficulties made me a better doctor, it has made me a better human being. I have achieved my goals not despite of my mental health difficulties, but because of my mental health difficulties. And so this is my message to everyone out there, medical students, foundation doctors, anyone considering a career in psychiatrist. in psychiatry. And I was really honored to contribute to the True Psychiatry campaign. And there's a paradigm shift here. I remember Professor Wendy Byrne was giving a talk about when she was a junior doctor, and a colleague of hers had living experience of a psychiatric condition. And he was terrified that anyone would find out. And the public stigma and the self-stigma truly tormented him. But now we're actually reaching out to people with lived experience of mental health difficulties. And we're saying that, welcome to our profession, because your living experience is an asset that we embrace. So the point I'm making is that there is no shame to experience mental health difficulties. Actually, it's not only possible, it's probable. 1 in 4 of us will experience mental health problems at some point during our lives. If it's not you, it will be someone you know. It's okay not to be okay. And recovery is a reality, not for the many, not for the few, but for the many. Recovery is a reality, not for the few, but for the many. We're not doing enough for people who have serious mental illnesses, and my heart goes out to them. And we need to do more. And there really needs to be a parity of esteem between physical health and mental health. And hopefully the government will allocate more resources for the provision of mental health care services. So how did I get that's the title of my talk? Well, I took a few years out of my training, and I delivered the Wounded Healer to over 75,000 people in 18 countries and 5 continents worldwide. Like I said, there was a fire burning in my belly, and there was a thunder in my heart. And here's the global footprint of the Wounded Healer. And I was really fortunate because I made some absolutely amazing connections. But obviously, it's a digital age. We need to take full advantage of social media. So I'm very active on Twitter. I would highly recommend that you join Twitter, raise awareness of the importance of mental health. I've met some inspirational people. Actually, I think I met Zain on LinkedIn, if I'm not mistaken. So you will meet some people who will truly inspire you. And thank you again, Zain, for reaching out to me and for inviting me. So there it is. One of the proudest moments in my life. And if you told me when I was 21 years old and I was suicidal and I was forced to interrupt my studies and I was impoverished and I was hopeless, that I would not only recover, but I would receive the highest honor from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, I would never have believed you. And so your duty as psychiatrists, as doctors, is to instill hope in our patients, that not only can they recover, not only can they function again, but they can find happiness and they can be the best at what they do, and they can even realize their dreams. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hankia. I think I speak for everyone when I say we're both captivated and inspired by your talk and by your story overall. So we do have one question, I think probably quite specifically directed to you.
Yeah.
Is that somebody has sent in a question saying, I've always wanted to pursue psychiatry since I joined my medical college.
Yeah.
I have some traumatic experiences in childhood. I need to take help from a psychiatrist in my 5th year for my depression.
Yeah.
Now, as a doctor, I'm afraid, thinking that if I pursue psychiatry, my past trauma will haunt me.
Yeah.
Fear that I won't be able to practice it as a clinician because I'm very affected by people's sad stories.
Yeah.
I'm now confused about what to do. So what do you think?
I want to thank that person for being so honest and open and for sharing their experiences. I'm so sorry that they had adverse childhood experiences, and I really empathize, and my heart goes out to you. I understand that you might think it's triggering, that it might be too close to home. If you have, lived the living experience of psychological problems, I really want to share this message with you that you're not alone, and that some of the most supportive people that you'll ever meet in your life will be your supervisors, and they provide you with pastoral support, and even the college. I mean, oh my God, we have like the best kind of college president ever. presidents. You know, we have Dr. Adrian James, I've shared a platform with Dr. James, and he's given talks about his lived experience of depression. And got Professor Wendy Byrne, and these people are just so humble and so approachable and so empathetic. So the point I'm making is that you're not alone, you know, and just because you think it might be triggering, it doesn't mean that it will be. And I say that respectfully, because I thought it might be triggering. I thought it might be too close to home. But to really kind of emphasize, you're part of a team, you're part of a family. And if at any point you feel like it is triggering, then kind of reach out to your support network. And you can have a mentor, you can have supervisors, and you have your colleagues as well. And it's really good, actually, because actually I think by asking that question, you are indicating that whoever asked me that question, that they've come to a certain kind of space where they have that kind of insight, which I think reveals that this person has resilience. And some of the most resilient people I've met have had kind of lived the living experience of mental health difficulties. Okay, so kind of directly and succinctly answer your question. I want to validate your concern. And I was there myself, if that helps at all. I thought that it would be triggering, but it hasn't been triggering at all so far in my kind of 5 years working in the coalface of clinical psychiatry. On the contrary, it's amazing the kind of the authentic connections that I have with my patients. And I've never revealed that I have living experience in clinical practice. No, there are no regulations preventing me from doing so. But in kind of, at the coalface of clinical psychiatry, you're doing a lot more listening than you are talking. But I think patients, they sense it. Patients have asked me, how did you become more empathetic? How did you become that man? And I don't have to kind of say in so many words. So it's a nonverbal communication. It's the look in your eyes. It's the tone of your voice. But I think the person who asked me that question would be a fantastic psychiatrist. Just to emphasize, you are not alone. You are part of a family, and we will provide you with plenty of support and guidance. And thank you so much for asking that question. And I hope it does answer it to some extent. And I think there was my slide had my email address. And do connect with me on Twitter as well. There's a very supportive online community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hanke. Thank you for your answer and thank you for your talk. So now we're going to move on to, or come back to, in fact, Dr. Trudy Seneviratne. I'll just quickly introduce her again. She's been Registrar of the Royal College of Psychiatry since 2020. And she is a consultant adult and perinatal psychiatrist at South London Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust and has been since 2002. She's also the clinical director for the Psychological Medicine Clinical Academic Group and Lewisham Director at the Trust. And in 2019, she was awarded an OBE for services to perinatal psychiatry and the President's Medal of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Trudy Seneviratne.
Thank you so much. And absolutely enormous apologies. We had a technical glitch. So as we get used to this world of Zooming and Microsoft Teams, I guess we think we've got it nailed, but not quite. Anyway, I'm here. So that was really humbling to listen.
We can't see you at the moment. Is there something in front of your camera? Oh, there we are. We can see you now. Thank you.
Sorry, can you see me now? Can you see me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Trudy.
Okay, there we go. More technical glitches. Anyway, I'm absolutely, just thrilled to be here and to be with you all. And it's, and I guess as a registrar for the college, I just want to thank you all for, first of all, listening into this talk, because part of what we'd love all of you to be thinking about is a journey into psychiatry. So, amazing talk, Ahmed, to always so humbling to hear what you've gone through. I guess, the college has got over 19,000 people now, over 19,000 psychiatrists at all different grades all across the world. And just a couple of seconds on my particular journey. So sort of, I'm from Sri Lanka, but I emigrated as a young kid to Hackney in East London, and so I went to a really good Catholic school there. And actually, I was well on the way to becoming a surgeon in medical school, because I actually wanted to be an artist, not not really a doctor at all. But I got nobbled into it by my dad, who was a paediatrician, and it was the very last placement in psychiatry. I went to St Bart's Medical School, and the very last placement I worked, in fact, in Hackney, which is where I was raised, and couldn't believe how amazing the psychiatrists were that I worked with. They bowled me over and really told me, or educated me, that actually the brain is absolutely the most important organ we have, that if our brain doesn't work in some way, that we as humans have absolutely no quality of life. They really showed me that we can delve deeply into the lives of people to work out whether it's a biological cause that's causing the psychosis or the depression or the anxiety, whatever it is, but also, you know, the whole array of psychological factors that might be playing, and of course the sort of richness of where people come from, their social backgrounds, their cultural backgrounds, you know, all of the factors that, you know, involve who we are as people. And that was a massive that, you know, light bulb moment for me. I thought, that's it, I'm gonna go into psychiatry. It was also so behind the rest of medicine, you know, the money invested in psychiatry, into the buildings that patients actually go to when they are mentally unwell, were just awful compared to the rest of medicine. I thought they're still pretty terrible, actually, a generation later. Funding into psychiatric drugs was nowhere near the funding that was going into, for example, HIV medicine that was happening in the late 80s, or indeed, you know, things like cancer, which of course, you know, money is required for all of that, but psychiatric psychopharmacology is still way behind. So what does a college do? You know, as a psychiatrist, one can, you know, you can work in a whole variety of specialties. So I happen to be a general adult and perinatal psychiatrist, and I'll say a bit more about that later. You know, it takes us from cradle right to the end of our lives. So older adult psychiatrist, old age psychiatrist, to a whole, you know, CAMS, children's psychiatrist. It also allows you to, as a psychiatrist, you can be a hardcore biological psychiatrist and really get interested in the biology and the treatments and the causes of illness biologically. But you can also become, you know, a very psychologically, more psychiatrists are psychologically minded, but you can also be a therapist, or sort of lean towards becoming a therapist in any modality. And you can also do all of those things and both of those things. So I think it, you know, psychiatry gives a real richness as a doctor. It's, you know, like all of medicine, it's you know, being a psychiatrist can be, you know, can be hard work, but actually, you know, I combine my world as a clinician, as an educator, and doing some research, and pulling all of that together. I've just come off, you know, 2 very busy days on a mother and baby unit where patients have been incredibly sick with psychotic depression, catatonia, you know, severe OCD. But actually the reward in seeing people get better is incredible. So that keeps me going. So I've been a psychiatrist for, you know, quite a long time now. I won't say exactly how long, but between 25 and 30 years. So it's quite a long time. And it, you know, I am not bored. And that's, I think, an amazing thing to say as a doctor, and in a specialty where I just think, actually, I have so many more questions now than I did when I started in psychiatry. I'm absolutely delighted I became a psychiatrist and not a surgeon. And I think there's a real richness and a path that one can go on in psychiatry. And, you know, bringing it right into COVID times. I think COVID, of course, is, you know, awful, isn't it? And dealing with this pandemic is terrible in so many levels. And COVID also highlights the impact of COVID on people's mental health. It's sort of hidden in some cases and much more obvious in other places. So as well as the awful sort of physical consequences of COVID, we've also got the mental health or the psychiatric complications of COVID. So listen, on that, I'm going to pause there and just say thank you to everybody for joining. Please sort of think about your journey in becoming a psychiatrist. And, you know, this year we had an almost, well, it was pretty much 100% fill rate for our core psychiatric trainees, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think it just highlights, certainly in my lifetime, how important psychiatry has become within medicine. I've just come off a call with lots of colleagues from some of the other medical royal colleges, and actually all of them, College of Surgeons, anaesthetists, paediatricians and child health, everyone, RCP, all talking about, you know, having a bedrock of mental health training within their colleges. So, you know, just pausing and stopping there really, and I can pick up on my own specialty a bit later, Zane. But thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Silver, on that. Once again, amazing to hear your story right from the beginning to the end. And on to Dr. David McLaughlin, who is a consultant in general adult psychiatry. He took his core training at SLAM and a research fellowship with the IOPPN at King's. And he was later awarded a scholarship from the RCP to work with this Centre for Sustainable Healthcare. And he currently works in rehabilitation psychiatry, and he also has an interest in early intervention and addiction. So over to you, Dr. McLaughlin.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, I'm just going to put my camera on. Have I got my camera on? Here we go. Hi there. Yeah, so I'm David McLaughlin. I am absolutely thrilled to be invited to speak to you guys today. Partly because of the amazing quality of the other speakers that are here, but also because it wasn't that long ago that I was in the seats that you're in just now. So about 10 years ago, I went to one of these events, and it was by going to one of these events that the Royal College of Psychiatrists put on that it confirmed my desire to become a psychiatrist. So I now have the burden to make sure that I don't let the side down, and that I keep on inspiring you guys, because the chances are you're probably already very interested in psychiatry. So my job today is to keep you interested. But one of the things that I also wanted to do was just to expand your horizons even further. So psychiatry is an enormous speciality. It's incredibly diverse in terms of the different things that you can do within the career. And it's also a speciality which really celebrates diversity. And that's actually kind of one of the things that I really loved about it. You don't need to fit in a specific box to be a psychiatrist. So whoever you are, whatever your background is, you will be really, really welcomed within this specialty. So I'll just click on to my next slide just now. So when I was a junior doctor, and I was actually just beginning to specialize in psychiatry, I went to a talk by one of my heroes at the Institute of Psychiatry, and she brought up this picture of a door, and she said to all of us in the room, what I want you to do is imagine yourself in 30 years' time, and what do you want the name plaque on your door to say? And what title do you want there to be underneath your name plaque? You know, do you want it to be Medical Director of West London Mental Health Services? Do you want it to be Professor Smith, Head of Functional Neuroimaging at King's College London? And I remember kind of sitting there and thinking, yeah, okay, wow, what do I want my name plaque to be? And we were told there's so many different pathways that you can go down. You know, you can become a clinician, spending lots of time with patients. You can become an academic, doing incredible research. You can get involved with policy, you know, so helping government decide things like whether it's a good idea to introduce minimal pricing on alcohol, or you can become a manager, or you can become an educator. And I remember thinking, wow, it feels overwhelming. And so moving on to the next slide, I did something slightly different. So what I ended up doing is I ended up doing I've had a bit of a patchwork career. So I've been qualified now for, well, I graduated from medical school about 11 years ago. And during that time, I feel like I've done little bits of everything, actually. So I've kind of abandoned the idea of this fantasy door and fantasy name plaque. And I've just kind of taken up opportunities that have popped up along the way. And at the same time, I've tried to make sure that I am balancing my work-life situation and not getting too overwhelmed by all the opportunities. So sometimes you need to say no, but hopefully during the course of this talk, I will just illustrate to you some of the really fun, amazing, exciting things which I got a chance to do, and I'm still getting chances to do, and just to show you that actually if you do choose psychiatry, there's so much more beyond beards and bow ties and the bread and butter, and there's an enormous amount of kind of really quite exciting things that you can do with a career in mental health. But my next slide is a bit of a disclaimer. So my disclaimer is that I'm actually not particularly special, which is why I'm very humble to have been asked to speak at this event to you guys today, because I scraped my way into medical school. I didn't get very good grades at all, actually. I flunked chemistry. I nearly failed history, but somehow or other I managed to get into medical school. I went to the University of Dundee, and I was a very average medical student. I did a BMSc in neuroscience, but again, I didn't set the world on fire. I got a 2-1 in my project, my bio, but I actually got a 3rd because I didn't know the difference between controls, which if you do any research, you know that controls are quite important. So again, I really didn't set the world on fire, but I did know that I wanted to become a psychiatrist because I just find it so interesting and fascinating. But again, as a junior doctor, again, I never felt like I was that particularly amazing, but this picture in the bottom of the screen is actually taken my last day in A&E, and after this picture was taken and my consultant found out that I was becoming a psychiatrist, I remember him kind of taking me aside and saying, "David, do you know that you're actually not that bad a doctor? Like, you could probably do core medical training if you really wanted to." And I kind of laughed and I was like, "Okay, sure," but I was very confident. I knew I wanted to do psychiatry again because I'd been to events like this and I knew I had a feeling about what lay ahead of me. So then I went off to train at the South London and Maudsley Foundation Trust, and I was there throughout the whole of my core training and then my higher training. And as part of that, there were lots of opportunities to do research at the Institute of Psychiatry and also teach medical students at King's College. But again, as part of the disclaimer, wherever you are in London or the UK or the world, there will be opportunities for you. So coming to the South London Maudsley Foundation Trust or the Institute of Psychiatry, it's an amazing opportunity, but it's not the be all and end all. We live in a very, very connected world right now. And as you heard from the Wounded Healer, Ahmed, earlier on, there are tools like social media, Twitter particularly, is excellent for connecting with people. And that's actually how initially I got involved with lots of the fun projects that I will talk about later. But then laterally, actually, through Instagram was another way that I managed to connect with people and get involved with some fun projects. The other way to get involved with really interesting opportunities actually is just to stay engaged with the Royal College of Psychiatrists, because that way you build up this network of some really quite spectacular people. And that's actually, I think, why I really enjoyed my career early on, was because I got involved with the Royal College of Psychiatrists trainee committee, and I built up this network of trainees across the country, and that was just an amazing experience to kind of meet other like-minded people who were also just so enthusiastic about psychiatry. But yeah, so I think I'll move on to the next slide just now. So the title of this talk is Beyond Beards and Bow Ties, and I chose that title because I wanted to kind of just to articulate the fact that there is so much more to psychiatry than the stereotypes and the cliches. Not that there's anything wrong with having a beard or a bow tie, and also a lot of my talks actually kind of about stuff that isn't the bread and butter, but the bread and butter of psychiatry is also equally amazing. Like you heard Dr. Trudy a few minutes ago talking about the mother and baby unit. Dr. Trudy was actually one of my consultants who'd helped train me, and she is a phenomenal psychiatrist. There's a documentary actually with Louis Through. He's I've got a picture of him in the bottom, and I think you can probably find that online somewhere, but that was actually filmed at Dr. Trudy's unit, the National Mother and Baby Unit. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about the bread and butter of what kind of actual clinical work looks like, that's a very good documentary. There's another very good documentary with Stacey Dooley, which is set in St George's in London as well. And so it's just quite an interesting insight for you to kind of see what it looks like in psychiatric services. A lot of your time you spend in meetings, talking to patients, their families, and also quite a lot of time doing paperwork as well. Increasingly, as you get more senior, I think you spend more and more time kind of maybe writing reports. But you have to really like people, I think, become a psychiatrist, and you have to actually really care about people as well. And even though I mentioned earlier in my disclaimer, I never thought that I was particularly special. I wasn't amazingly academic, but I always did care about my patients. And I think that's kind of one of the things that's helped me along the way and hopefully made me a good doctor. But just moving on to my next slide, I will tell you a bit more about kind of some of the opportunities that I had. So again, I told you I wasn't a particularly academic person. I tried desperately to get onto the academic foundation training program. I applied for a PhD, I think twice, and I wasn't given the funding because I wasn't a good enough candidate. But through joining the Psychiatric Trainee Committee, I built this network of psychiatric trainees, and together we applied for some funding and we put on a national debating competition for medical students. And it was essentially a recruitment program to encourage medical students to think about a career in mental health. And then we wrote it up as a paper, and we actually were shortlisted for the European Federation of Psychiatric Trainees Excellence Award, which was really amazing. And then I think off the back of some of those projects, I then got the opportunity to do a research fellowship at the IOP and do some interesting work looking at sustainable healthcare. And then I suppose also because I was enthusiastic and I surrounded myself with kind of I guess great role models, I then got the chance to write a book chapter, or to edit a book chapter in this book called the Modesty Prescribing Guidelines, which if you are a psychiatrist, you will be familiar with this book because it's basically our kind of go-to manual on how to prescribe. I also got to write a really cool document for the World Psychiatric Association, and it was their position statement on addiction. And this was at a really exciting time when it was at the beginning of the opiate epidemic in North America. And so it was a huge topic. So I got to, as lead author, I got to coordinate this international team of basically world experts. And I was like a 29-year-old at this point. I hadn't even finished my training. And I'm like emailing like Professor so-and-so from Stanford and Professor so-and-so from Oxford, whatnot. And collectively we wrote this position statement, and that became like a document which it basically advised policymakers, researchers, what the priorities should be in terms of addressing the issue of addiction. So these were some of the kind of these were some like the traditional opportunities that I got given and try to make the most of. But now moving on to the next slide here, I'll tell you a bit more about some of the less traditional stuff that I've done as well. So mental health outside of the box, and then I'll skip on to the next slide as well. So I don't know if you can gather as well, but I'm actually not in control of my slides. That's why you'll hear me say like on to the next slide. So one of the really cool things I got to do when I was a trainee in addiction psychiatry, I was spending my bread and butter was seeing people who were addicted to heroin or prescription painkillers and getting them on methadone programs, also kind of doing alcohol detoxes with people, and also thinking holistically about their physical health, like their liver, do they need any kind of sexual health counselling? But one of the really cool things I got to do is I got to go to Glastonbury, and I got to be a drugs and alcohol doctor in Glastonbury. And that was just one of the nurses who I worked with. She was a head of welfare at Glastonbury. So yeah, so I got to go to Glastonbury. It was amazing, and worked there as a drug and alcohol doctor. Incredible experience. One of the funniest things one of the most unusual situations that I found myself in was looking after a man who had a drug-induced psychotic episode. So he was hallucinating. He could see and hear things which weren't there, and he was really, really distressed. But one of the things I had to do was basically ask him, like, look, what have you taken? And I took a drug history, just like you would do anywhere else in the world. But I mean, I was in a field in Glasgow covered in mud. And when I was taking his drug history of asking him what he'd taken, one of the things that he told me about was he produced lots of different drugs out of his pocket. But then he produced a live toad, which he'd been licking as well. So obviously we confiscated the drugs, released the toad, and he ended up we had to get him out of Glastonbury, and we had to treat him there with some lorazepam, and he ended up going to hospital. But that was a really cool experience. There's a charity called We Are the Loop who do lots of festivals, probably not so much festivals just now with COVID, but that's one thing that you can do. That's outside of the box. The next slide, please. Another thing that one of the most rewarding things that I did, I did a training course looking at the mental health of refugees, and it was refugee children, and it was just fascinating, and it was just it was just really interesting, and even during the course, it was a simulation course, it just felt really, really rewarding. So then, as a higher trainee in psychiatry, most trusts will allow you some time to develop a special interest. So I developed my interest in working with refugees by running a garden project in South London. So I worked with a group of all men who had post-traumatic stress disorder. And we did gardening work for a couple of hours on a Thursday afternoon. And what I found was that these were men who found it very difficult to talk about their experiences, and they didn't trust anybody. And a lot of them had experienced quite a lot of sexual violence, a lot of humiliation and torture. So it was very, very difficult for them to talk and to trust. But when their hands were busy and when they were doing things and they weren't forced to have eye contact with you, they found it a lot easier to talk about their experiences. And I really, really enjoyed that. I thought it was incredibly rewarding. And since then, I've then done quite a lot of medical legal work with legal aid, essentially writing reports on the mental health of refugees. So then on my weekends, I'll occasionally go out to some of these immigration removal centres. They're quite grim. They look a lot like prisons, and write these reports. But seeing the refugees, again, it can feel really rewarding. And it's actually, I mean, this is not why I do it, but it is also quite lucrative. You get paid for doing these reports, even though it's through legal aid. And I find it really intellectually stimulating, because you're working often with the solicitors or lawyers, and you're answering really difficult questions like, why is it that this Afghanistani 17-year-old girl, she cannot remember her journey into the UK? Is this because she's lying? And so then I'll have to kind of research the literature and understand kind of, well, what does the literature tell us about dissociative states and about inconsistencies with people's memories if you experience trauma? So again, it's really, really interesting work that it's not difficult to get into these kind of things. And then my next slide, I can't remember what the next slide's about. Oh, okay. So I'm gay, and I swim and play water polo with an LGBTQ swim team. And one of the things that we recognised within my club was that we had quite a lot of members. There's 300 people in the club, that a lot of them were having mental health issues. And so about a year ago, and there was a lot of interest in mental health. So about a year ago, I gathered together some junior doctors from my trust, and we ran a mental health first aid course. And it was really well attended. We put it on social media. We actually wrote a paper. We got a little prize from the college, which was nice. And then I got approached by this charity called Out for Sport, and they asked me if essentially we could scale it up. Google, the search engine, they agreed to get on board as our corporate partner and help us scale up the event. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the event because of COVID, but we still ran virtual events, and we had a whole bunch of sports clubs attending. And so that was one of the little fun projects I was doing kind of during COVID times, actually. And then my next slide. So because I did all this kind of these mental health first aid training courses, it also caught it, and I mentioned earlier that I have a little Instagram account called Off Duty Doctor. It caught the attention of quite a lot of corporate kind of people, like city law firms and investment banks and whatnot. And so they basically asked me, well, look, we loved the training that you did with all the different LGBT sports teams. Could you do similar kind of well-being training courses for us? And so I did. And again, that was just a really interesting experience, because thinking about, I think as a psychiatrist, you get trained how to think about kind of treating people when they're ill. But actually doing this kind of work also helped me to think about how to prevent kind of illness as well. So taking more of a kind of health promotion, disease prevention type approach. And again, it pays quite well, and it's a fun little side gig as well for your evenings and weekends. Because again, actually, I remember again when I was a junior doctor, a lot of my friends were going off to become surgeons or ophthalmologists or dermatologists, because they're like, oh, there's more money in dermatology, or there's more private work in surgery. Like, you'll never get any private work in psychiatry. And like, you know, London is expensive, and if people have children, they want to be able to buy a flat, get a deposit. It sounds vulgar, but I mean, it's worth knowing about these things. There are opportunities and ways to make money. Okay, so my next slide, please. Okay, so the other thing is so I talked a bit about kind of having a social media presence. And I think the whole world is paying more and more attention now to mental health and well-being. And as a psychiatrist, you will be in a really good position to be an expert in that field. So, like I said, I mentioned, a couple of years ago, I set up an Instagram account for fun with my friends. And one of my friends wanted to tag me in a picture on holiday, and I didn't have an Instagram account, so she made me set up an Instagram account. But then because of that Instagram account, I got approached by somebody from the MTV Awards who asked me if I would be interested in being the backstage doctor at the MTV Awards. So a couple of weeks later, I found myself doing kind of breathing exercises, mindfulness exercises, and kind of giving harm reduction advice to a bunch of celebrities, which was a fun experience. And I'm aware that this is being recorded, so I'm not going to kind of reveal any names or anything, but that was great fun. So some of those pictures that you can see are backstage, and that was the little concierge team. I've also been approached by like ITV, kind of different news outlets, and I'm sure Trudy, I imagine, will have been asked to do lots of kind of media work. The college does a really good media training course as well, which if you're interested in doing that kind of stuff, it's well worth doing their media training course. It was excellent. In one of the pictures down at the bottom there, there's a picture of me kind of sticking my tongue out. That's actually one of my best friends, a girl called Sarah. I'll talk about her a bit later on. So she was, by coincidence, the backstage nutritionist at the MTV Awards. She's also quite a successful model. She's done things like Victoria's Secret, modeling, Burberry, whatnot. And she's now set up a charity called the Be Well Collective, and I'm one of their advisors in terms of their mental health kind of program. And essentially, they're endorsed by the British Fashion Council to promote mental health and well-being within the fashion and entertainment industry. And if we go on to my next slide, I think, do I maybe have a bit of, yeah, I mentioned them there as well. And that's just really, again, it's just like something that keeps me interested in my job, and it's kind of going about, just gives you a different flavor. I love my day job. I love working with people with psychosis, particularly actually young people with first episode psychosis. When you meet them at this really pivotal point in their career, in their life, really, it's so rewarding to get to be that safe person that they speak to, that they trust, and you get to use your brain to help fix theirs, which is just an amazing, yeah, it's an awesome job. But yeah, also I guess, like, if you become a psychiatrist and you train in mental health, you become an expert in mental health, you'll also have the opportunity to work with lots of different charities as well. And these are some of the ones that I've worked with recently. And then I think, what's my next slide?
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Just gonna have to cut you off there if that's all right. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I've overrun, but yeah, I mean, I can forward on the slides. You're welcome to do them all.
No problem. Yeah, we're just a little bit tight on time, and no, it's been incredible talk. I mean, you've mentioned things I had absolutely no idea existed. I mean, from Glastonbury to the refugee center to, you know, the power of Instagram as well. And now we're just going to move on to Rachel Braverman, who is the parent and carer rep for the RCP's London division. She's experienced mental health problems herself since she was a child and cared for her son and her best friend. She previously worked as an advisor with the National Collaborating Centre for Mental Health and as a researcher investigating the links between mental illness and financial difficulty. And now she's a director of the NVR Practitioners Consortium, offering training in nonviolent resistance, which is a parenting technique for those caring for children and young people who display challenging behavior. So over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. So a few years ago, my therapist told me that I'd had a psychotic episode when I was a child, which actually surprised me because I thought psychosis meant schizo, it meant mad women in the attic, it meant being sectioned, it meant permanent mental distress. And this episode happened when I was 11. It was a time of great difficulty. I was being hugely bullied. Home, for various reasons, was not a safe or comfortable place to be. I was always told that I was clever. I'd spent all my time reading science fiction and eating, and those were my refuge. And the bullying was really, really nasty. According to my schoolmates, I had the lurgy, which meant that people weren't allowed to talk to me. They weren't allowed to touch me. I was absolutely isolated, lonely, and bewildered. And in 1971, it was a fantastic time for science fiction. So I spent my time walking with the golden people of Mars, surfing the sands of Dune. I dreamt like an android of electric sheep, and then I had to wake up and go to school. The one thing I could cling on to, was that I was always being told that I was cleverer than everybody else. Although it really puzzled me that if I was so clever, how come I didn't know how to get on with people? How come I couldn't do simple things like go to sleep at night or regulate my eating, because I could never stop eating? But one of the things I could do was spell. It was one of my fortes. Every spelling test I expected to get tick, 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 tick against every single word. And then one day I got tick, 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 cross. I had spelt separate wrong. I had spelt it S-E-P-E-R-A-T-E. Somehow I found the courage to question it with sarcastic Mr. Treadway, who told me in a sneer to go and look it up in the dictionary. And there it was. Separate, S-E-P-A-R-A-T-E. How could I have got that so wrong? I never got spellings wrong. And on the way home, something caught my eye that made the whole world suddenly make sense. I passed a greengrocer's with fruit and vegetables laid out in boxes on bright green artificial grass. In one corner, there was a box of apple with a label on it. And actually, I suspect most of you don't know, actually the currency had changed fairly recently from old money to new money. So we'd already had that change, which was a little bit confusing. But this box said apples, 20p for 6, 3p, separate, S-E-P-E-R-A-T-E. I knew it. And in that instant, the world made sense, because it suddenly came to me. I was the alien and everybody else was the humans. And they, like all the science fiction books have been trying to tell me, were messing with my mind, and they had simply changed the spelling of that word. So in 1971, the spelling of the word separate changed. And I can remember that moment as being utterly and completely cut off, but also completely exhilarating. And I existed, I'm not sure how long it lasted. It could have been a few days, could have been a few weeks. I would tend to think of it as the year, but thinking about how life was, it couldn't have been a whole year. It was probably a few weeks. I existed in this space where I was the alien, everybody else was the human beings. And it was exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because I'd got one over on everybody else, on the other people who were trying to mess with my mind. But terrifying because I never knew when they were going to change the world. I became really scared of walking on the pavement because I was convinced that the paving stones were just going to disappear and I would end up in chaos and oblivion. The episode passed. I'm not quite sure how it did. But what didn't happen was I didn't get help. In those days, back in 1971, and yes, you can then work out how old I am now, it felt like there wasn't very much help for children. CAMHS was a long way from existing at that stage. And I spent a good few years working very hard on an eating disorder, getting very depressed, very anxious, and masking it. That was one of my absolute expert things. It's one of the things that eating disorder is really good for is if you don't want to show your feelings, stuff it down with food. That really worked for me for many years. But of course, it all came to a head eventually. One day, the neighbour, I was married at that point, my ex-husband was out, but the neighbours ended up calling the police because I was screaming so loudly they thought that he was murdering me. And it was at that point that I realised I really needed to get some professional help, that all this scurrying around trying to make everything seem okay when in fact my world was continually falling apart was really, really not working for me. From the outside, it looked as if everything was fine. I had a husband, I had a job, I had a cat, I had a house. But inside, every morning I would wake up desperately wishing that I hadn't woken up. I did make I made plans to take my own life, although I obviously never did. And I actually never tried to the point that I needed to go into hospital, although sometimes the cuts would get second glances, shall we say. And then I found help. And then I finally found somebody who could tell me that I wasn't crazy or mad or different or an alien. Actually, what I had was a mental illness. And it had a name, it had several names. It had the name of anxiety, it had the name of clinical depression, it had the name of an eating disorder, and that strange episode that had haunted me since I was 11 was actually a psychotic episode. And in fact, in a strange sort of way, was a sane response to an insane situation. It was the way that I made sense of things. That actually all of these illnesses were about me trying to make sense of a world that seemed to me utterly chaotic. And what I needed to do was to find better ways to make sense of the world. And over the years, that's what I have really worked with, a great deal of help that's been done. And I'm so grateful really to the therapists and the various teams, including, for example, my GP. So if any of you decide not to go into psychiatry but become general practitioners, please remember about mental health, because it was my GP who first told me that I wasn't a big fat pig with no willpower. Actually, I had an eating disorder. It's called binge eating disorder. It's only been recognized comparatively recently. But the feeling of my hand going to my mouth and there's nothing that I can do about it, actually that's a sign of an eating disorder and not the sign of a moral disorder. It doesn't make me a bad person, just a sick person trying to get better. I'm really pleased to say that the situation has been rather different for my son. My son is adopted and he experienced a lot of trauma, both from the fact of being adopted, but also what led him to being adopted in the first place. And when he was little, he was also very unhappy, very chaotic. He also behaved extremely badly because that was the way that he expressed his distress, was through hitting out and rudeness and name calling and all sorts of things. He didn't, when he came to us, he had a few words. He then didn't speak again until he was 3, all sorts of things. However, because of my experiences and my partner's experiences, we need to get help quickly. And he was seen by CAMHS, he's been seen by CAMHS a number of times. And really, we have it in writing that if it wasn't for our parenting, he would probably be in a secure unit by now, and he isn't. And in fact, actually, when my talk was slightly delayed, my main concern was the fact that he's out with his friends. And I never thought that those words would come out of my mouth. My son, who has had all these difficulties, all these mental health problems, thanks to the help of a large number of psychiatrists and other mental health professionals, is out with his friends doing perfectly normal things. And my worry right now is whether he's going to come home on time. How normal is that? How wonderful is that? And I can remember him sitting with Lewis, his therapist, and he was acting out these dreadful, really difficult scenes. And there was Lewis, able to get to the edge of this child's chaotic, scary, horrified, traumatized universe and gently try to draw him back into a safer world. And I noticed in the poll, I just want to end on a quick plea here. I noticed on the poll that very few people were thinking of going into learning difficulties as a specialization. My son, as well as having considerable mental health problems, also has a number of learning difficulties. And it's people who have been able to understand both of those who have made such a difference in his life. So if you're thinking about specializations, I would invite you to think about those as well. And yeah, just, you can make such a difference in people's lives. So I really urge you to think about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for your son's story as well. I think it's really, really valuable for all of us here to, you know, to hear it from your perspective. We've got a question for you from one of the participants. So how have you found the second glances that you got in response to self-harm scars, particularly from patients?
Well, can I just say, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not in anything to do with the medical profession. The nearest I've ever come to it is in research. And I'm lucky that I personally don't have those kinds of scars. For me, mental illness has been very much an invisible one. Where I have perhaps seen some of that is that my weight has swung from, I had a relapse a while back and put on 7 stone, which is coming off very, very slowly because that's how it is. And so I do think there is something about people being very judgmental about, as it were, the physical manifestations of mental illness. Are there risks to particularly sick parents when being seen by doctors with visible scars? I think that will have to be one for the psychiatrist. Personally, I see scars sometimes on people because that's in the nature of things. And personally, I kind of more relate to it than anything else. So I think that'll have to be one for the panel.
No worries. Thank you so much. So we're going to go to the panel now, and I'm just going to quickly introduce the panelists who haven't been introduced already. So we have Dr. Golnar Arif-Adib, who is an academic psychiatrist based at UCL. Dr. Manraj Bamra, who's a higher trainee in general and old age psychiatry at SLAM. And Dr. Poorna Nagasinghe, who's a higher trainee ST5 in child and adolescent, currently working in Southwest London, and St. George's Mental Health NHS Trust. So the way this is going to work now is that each of them are going to have a minute or two to summarize their specialty, and we're going to turn over specialty to specialty quite quickly. So first we've got Dr. Golnar Arif-Adib, who's going to talk to us about academic psychiatry. You're muted.
Sorry. Hello. Hi, everyone. So I've set my timer and I'm going to be very concise. But how did I get into psychiatry? I had a quite unusual route. I come from a surgical family, and actually what I wanted to do was be a surgeon like my grandfather and mother before me. But when I started, I realized that for me, it felt quite monotonous, and I didn't really like theatre banter. And I had a really tough trauma and orthopedics rotation, and it really made me reconsider. And then I thought, what about GP? I love people, and I think that's been consistent throughout the talks. I really care and I love people, and I was working in the Midlands, and I absolutely loved the experience of sitting with people and thinking about their depression, about their anxiety, about their child not going to school. And I was so lucky in that the GP practice really let me have that space. And then as I started GP training, a psychiatrist, which I had in my first placement, said to me, you should consider psychiatry. You really like this. You're really good at it. And I said, it doesn't really suit me as my personality. I really like fast pace, doing things, getting things done. And I was part of the GP trainee committee thinking about commissioning. And he was like, you're missing a trick here. Are you saying that psychiatry trainees are lazy? And I was like, ooh. And he really nailed it on the head for me, because it's the stigma of psychiatry. And actually what I learned from this experience was how we stigmatize psychiatrists. Starting from medical school, and it's this kind of thing about who does psychiatry. Oh, they're a bit mad and they're a bit different. So I went into psychiatry and I absolutely loved it. I've been so well supported. Ballant Group. I've done CAT training, which is cognitive analytic therapy. I've worked in Glastonbury, just like David. I'm really into wellness. I'm a huge wellness enthusiast, so I'm doing enhanced psychoeducation groups. I don't think in any other specialty would people say, this girl really likes wellness, like roll things out, see what happens. And I would describe myself as a cyber psychiatrist, as well as being an academic psychiatrist. So I've done an NIHR ACF. And I'm really enthusiastic about the use of digital health technology, particularly for people with SMI. But I'm really, really passionate about how we as individuals can influence the health and physical well-being on a larger scale in a similar fashion to the other doctors. I'm really happy for people to contact me if they want to talk about getting into academic psychiatry, and also my Twitter handles out there, and I'll be in the breakout rooms.
Thank you so much. So straight up next, we have Dr. Manraj Bhamra, who's going to talk to us about old age psychiatry. So over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Manny. I'm an old age psychiatry trainee. For me, at medical school, I didn't know much about psychiatry at all. I think we'd had a few lectures on the topic before our placement, but it was a whole new world for me. I remember the first case I saw. It was a male who believed that the police were after him and he was having auditory hallucinations of sirens. And I wondered, how could this person so strongly believe something like this and have these intense experiences? I was really fascinated and I wanted to learn more. But I was also inspired to choose psychiatry by a trainee I met during that placement. And he took his time to involve me in all of his cases, giving me a really valuable insight. He's actually moved to Australia now, but I'm still in touch with him to this day. And as a psychiatrist currently, I really hope to be able to inspire the next generation of psychiatrists like you in a similar way. At the moment, I do old age psychiatry, and I think it's a really fascinating specialty because you get to know your patients in a special way through exploring their rich histories, through dealing with the complexity of both their mental and physical illness, but by making a real difference to their day-to-day functioning. Things do move a bit slower in old age psychiatry, so you find that you actually have a little bit more time with your patients. You can really get to the bottom of what's going on. And I like to think of it as putting all the different pieces of a jigsaw together to really reveal the full picture. I think there's a misconception that old age psychiatry is just dementia and people don't get better, but really that's not true. With your input, our patients do get better and you really do make a difference. I think in psychiatry also there's a belief that you lose your medical skills and knowledge that you developed in medical school and as a junior doctor. But in old age psychiatry, I'm continuing to use my medical skills, my neuroscience skills, and obviously my psychiatry skills every day. I'm looking at blood tests, brain scans, performing memory tests. Our patients have complex physical health problems, and we're liaising with different professionals to really bridge this gap between mental and physical health care. And I think more than ever during this COVID era, there's an increasing need to safeguard the physical and mental health of our elderly and vulnerable patients.
Sorry, Dr. Bhamra's going to cut you off there. Okay, so on to... Oh, sorry, just muted myself. Sorry, thank you very much. Just moving on to Dr. David McLaughlin, who's going to talk to us about general adult psychosis and rehab.
So just to clarify, so general adult psychiatry is a little bit like an umbrella term, and underneath this umbrella term of general adult psychiatry, you get lots of other subspecialties or sub-branches of general adult psychiatry. And that can include things like rehabilitation psychiatry. So that's people who have had their illness for a long, long time and maybe need more like functional support to become more independent. Usually that's with illnesses like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar affective disorder. Another sub branch is liaison psychiatry. So that's working in A&E and also in general medical hospitals as a psychiatrist on site. That's really interesting if, like Manny, you enjoy that kind of the bridge between physical health and mental health. And it can also be really fast paced. And if like Gon or you enjoy like fast paced psychiatry, that's really exciting because it's like you make lots of decisions. I've got a real soft spot for early intervention psychiatry. So that's when you're looking after usually young people when they first develop an illness, because we know that with illnesses like psychosis, much like cancer, the quicker you catch it and you treat it, the better the long-term outcomes are. It's also an amazing experience to be somebody's first experience of the mental health service and to give them a good experience, get them on the right treatment early. And also it's a pivotal point in their life. But I mean, and you can work in inpatient settings, outpatient settings. I mean, there's an enormous amount of, choose psychiatry and you'll find something which you love because there's so many options. That's me done.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. So now next we're on to Dr. Purna Nagasinghe, who's going to talk about CAMS, which is Child and Adult Mental Health Services.
Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Purna Nagasinghe. I'm ST5 in CAMS. CAMS stands for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So I would like to talk a little bit about CAMS as well as why I chose that job. So it's a fascinating field actually, where we work with children up to the age of 18, up to their 18th birthday. So, and when we're working, actually, what I love in my job is like we work together in a truly multidisciplinary manner. So what I meant by that is the psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, various therapists like family therapists, music, play therapists. So we all work together when managing a young person. We get referrals from GPs and schools. Another thing which I like in my job is I get the chance to work with different professionals. We work with schools, social services, police, judicial system, and all other colleagues like GPs and pediatricians. So we all work together when managing a young person, as well as when helping the family that the child is coming from. I mean, it is truly rewarding to have that hope that I'm making a difference in someone's future, because we are working in the age group where the brain is still developing. So whatever the intervention that we put in actually will help the child to adapt, as well as to change the trajectory of their future. Because as Nelson Mandela said, like the children are our greatest future, and they are, children are our greatest treasure and they are our future. So I truly believe while working as a child and adolescent psychiatrist that I'm making a contribution towards that future. So come join me. Thank you.
Very much. And finally, on to Dr. Trudy Seneviratne again for perinatal psychiatry.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I was just listening to all of you. I'm just feeling so so wonderful listening to all the breadth of work you do, and it's just so wonderful for me to see David actually. You know, David, who was a trainee with me. Hi, David, at the Mother and Baby Unit. You know, just that's part of the joy of just seeing that journey people go on when they, you know, arrive in psychiatry. David was a core trainee with me, and now he's been a consultant for many years, and seeing just the diversity of stuff that he's doing. So I guess I told you a bit about why I became a psychiatrist earlier. So I basically went back as a trainee to work in Hackney, with the psychiatrist who'd inspired me. And on that journey, I got to work on a tiny 2-bedded mother and baby unit in Hackney, and did a little audit on the 2-bedded mother and baby unit. And the consultant at the time, he was a military psychiatrist, actually, Martin Deal. We got to go on a conference to Rome, and there I heard the guy, or the chap, Professor Kumar, who was the professor of the unit that I'm now lucky to be working in, and he gave the most amazing, inspiring talk about actually as people, as human beings, that obviously there's conception and then we develop in utero, and the woman as the container for us as people, that actually to secure the fetal development, you have to look after the woman. So I sort of had a chat with him and then went and met him at the Institute of Psychiatry, and actually it was my next light bulb moment, if you like, that within psychiatry, and David's talked about general adult psychiatry, what perinatal psychiatry is about is really intervening right at the beginning. So you intervene from conception onwards, because actually every day from conception onwards matters for our mental health as people. So that by looking after the woman, you're looking after her stress levels, her mental health in pregnancy, and we know that the mental health of the woman, and I guess her psychological well-being, has a direct impact on the developing fetus. The HPA axis, the stress axis, is set in utero, and those early weeks and months afterwards we know is absolutely critical. So I just thought, actually, as a perinatal psychiatrist, you can make a profound impact right at the beginning for us as human beings, and that feels like a really important place to invest in. It sort of fed into the fact that I loved obs and gynae, and also fed into the fact that I love diversity, I love culture. There's something beautiful about dealing with new babies and new life. Equally, there's something really tragic. We saw, Ahmed told us about the tragic case of Daksha, who sadly took her life having, had a relapse of bipolar illness. So it doesn't get any more horrific than having to deal with a mummy who's taken her own life, or indeed has perhaps taken her life and that of her baby. So, that's the absolute worst end of the spectrum. But, like I said, I had 2 days on the mother and baby unit yesterday where I saw, probably every single psychiatric diagnosis under the sun. It makes it really interesting. I spoke with partners, grandparents. I had 2 same-sex ladies on the ward at the moment. And so just that richness of diversity. And you know what? Everybody was getting better, whether it was medication, or someone has had ECT, or someone's had couple therapy. It was just a joy to see people getting better. So it's hard work. It's really draining, but actually I love getting up every day to go and do my clinical job. And I also love the other parts of my job, which include teaching and educating. I'm very much a clinician at heart, and I guess a bit like David, I went down the academic route for a bit here and there. I mean, I do a fair amount of research as well, but I'm very much a researcher.
We're just going to have to cut off there. I'm sorry about that.
It's an absolute pleasure, but do please choose psychiatry. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So just a quick mention here that there are still other specialties that are not represented here through whatever reason. So for example, forensic psychiatry and psychotherapy. So please do go and find out about those specialties too. It's not just limited to what you've seen here, although I can say with some certainty that all the panelists here and everyone who's spoken really has been inspiring to bring you to their chosen specialty. So now we're just going to go on to a panel discussion with all the speakers that we have here. So we're going to have, we're just going to run, after having taken all these these talks about specialties, we'd just like to find out again and see if people's minds have changed about which specialties that they'd like to go into. So guys, go ahead and poll. And once this poll's finished, we're just going to move over to a panel discussion who are going to take questions from everyone. So all the questions that you guys have been fantastically sharing in the chat, you get a chance to hear the answers now. So from Dr. Golna Arif Adib, from Dr. Manraj Bamra, Dr. David McLaughlin, Dr. Purna Nagasinghe, Dr. Trudy Sedavaratna, and actually Dr. Ahmed Hankir is going to stay for the panel discussion as well. So we're just going to, oh, here we go. So you guys can see the results now, and looks like Cams is winning.
Yeah.
Okay, so just going to hand over to Medin now, my colleague, who's going to bring in the questions for you guys on the panel. So over to you, Medin.
Hi everyone. So yeah, my name is Medin. I'm a final year medical student at Queen Mary's. Thanks all of you for sending your questions in. I've been reading them. I'm making a list here. I'm going to ask them, and then I'll try and direct them to one of the panelists, and then I'll let the other panelists answer it as well afterwards. So first question. So I think I'll direct this to Dr. Golna. Question for you. So if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be? So either as when you were a medical student or when you were training, what advice would you want to give to us?
So I suppose the one advice I'd say is be curious, carry on scoping things out. I often meet, especially women who are, they sort of say quite early on that they're going to do pediatrics or they're going to do GP. Just carry on being curious, and don't worry if things don't go to your plan. Like if you don't get that PhD funding, or you don't get that academic number that you wanted, or life will reveal itself, and just have faith in fate and carry on being curious.
Brilliant. I like that a lot. So carry on being curious. Does anyone else have any other answers for that as well? If not, I'll move on to the next question. Okay, so another question that we've got regarding the actual patient. So I'll ask this to Dr. Hanker, if that's okay. So how often does seeing patients with psychiatric problems actually affect you as the psychiatrist?
Ooh, how does it affect you? Well, I mean, I guess it's I mean, it could affect you in a positive way or a negative way. I would say a vast majority of kind of my clinical experience, it's affected me positively. I love kind of providing care to patients with mental health difficulties, and my patients inspire me. I think you don't want to, take your work back home with you. You have to have that kind of work-life balance, and so we're taught in our training to be empathetic, but not to be kind of emotionally attached. I think because I have lived experience, because I identify as both a mental health care provider and a mental health care receiver, the patients, especially the ones from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds, if I might be sensitive, but if I feel like there might be some kind of inequality or discrimination or stigma, then yeah, it does get to me. But that's the great thing. As I said, I've delivered this message before, and I'll say it again. You're not alone. You're part of a family. Actually, the presidential lead for racial equality, Dr. Raj Mohan, he's like an absolute legend. And I'm on kind of WhatsApp messaging terms with Raj. And if I sense that something's happening, I'll just send him a message. I'm like, Rad to the rescue. Am I overreacting here? Or is it like a proportionate reaction? So I think, I think it should affect us to an extent, but it certainly shouldn't cause us any distress or any impairment in functioning. And if that is the case, then kind of, reach out to your support network, your colleagues, your mentors, your supervisors, and they're all incredibly supportive. I would argue the most supportive supervisors in medicine are in psychiatry, and they're so approachable and they're so humble, and it's absolutely amazing.
That's it. Brilliant. Always love your answers, Dr. Hanker.
Mehdan, man, where have I've seen you, man? Remind
Seen
me
me many times,
many times, man. I've seen your handsome face around before. You don't mind my saying so.
No, okay.
I'm gonna mute myself now. I've said enough already.
Thank you. Okay, so just moving on to the next question. So I'll ask this to everyone. I'll let whoever wants to come up first to answer it. A bit about the well-being of a psychiatrist. So what support have you guys got in place to kind of protect you throughout your career, if you ever do need it? What is there available?
I'm hugely into that already. I mean, the amount of money I put into my own wellness is quite astronomical, and the wellness of my children and my husband. So I became interested in meditation. I've been trying to meditate since I was 18, and I've read about PTSD and transcendental meditation. So from an academic perspective, I read about depression, anxiety. I'm learning about how people manage it. And I often say meditation is your medication, and it's a discipline, and I struggle with it. But I always create space for meditation, but exercise. I'm really passionate about sort of like however you can to exercise. And also one of my cornerstones of health is like sort of sleep and nutrition. And I think as a psychiatrist, I really prioritize it, and not just for me, but for my family. And then I try and convey that to every person I see. Even if it's within the team, I'll keep on talking about how we can maximize our own wellness.
Brilliant. So it's about looking after yourself in order to look after others.
Yeah, it's not selfish to look after yourself, and especially to women, that it's like, I think people struggle with childcare and like managing and trying to do everything. It's, it's not selfish to have good childcare in place. It's not selfish to prioritize you going out with your husband, or you going to the gym. And it was interesting, I had a medical student with me yesterday, and she said, like, how are you not going to take this home with you now? And I said, to be honest, I care about my patients. I'm in the office, and before this I was checking in with them because I work for a crisis team, but I go home and I'm at home because it's a disservice to my family if I'm still thinking about my patients.
Okay, perfect. So I know we're running short on time. I know there's a lot of questions coming in as well, and in the breakout rooms you will have a chance to ask some more. I wanted to ask a question to Purna, if that's okay. So we had a lot of questions coming in, but I think one of the ones that's just come in now is really relatable to you. So do CAMHS patients often struggle with adjusting to adult services once they turn 18? And how can we help them with this transition?
Yeah, it's a real topical question, actually. Of course, the transition is difficult, but at the same time, when children are under our service, we make sure that if they need to be transitioned to adult services, we are always right throughout that transition period. We work jointly with them, and to make sure that before we close the cases that we normally say from our service, we hand it over to them, and we make sure that the child is assigned to a clinician. And so also we have meetings with the adult team, and so the initial meetings will be joint, so to make sure that there is continuity of care. So it is a real challenging period, very difficult period, but we understand that. That's why we always try to make sure that there's a period where we always work hand in hand with the other services, usually starting from 17 and a half and then going right up to 18 and then a little bit beyond that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I know I'm just playing about time, but I know, Manraj, you haven't been asked a question yet. So I have a final question for you, which is, how has COVID affected psychiatry? It's a very broad question, so I don't know how you want to approach it. Maybe talk about your own specific work.
I think it's affected kind of all of us, really, as doctors, as students, as patients. And I think the way we work from now has probably changed for the longer term. Starting with simple things like meetings. Team meetings we have they're basically all virtual now. So I'm running multidisciplinary team meetings. So that kind of affects the interactivity you have with your own team. Some patient contacts now are also virtual. So at the moment I work on a ward. So I'm essentially continuing business as usual, but with extra enhanced PPE measures. But I know that a lot of other services, particularly outpatient-based services, have now kind of turned more to a virtual interactions, and that can have benefits and that can have drawbacks. So I guess we're still learning and we're still using these new tools that we've never used before. Interestingly, types of therapy and groups, like I'm running Balint groups at the moment, which are kind of reflective practice groups with students, and we're doing that virtually. So it's all very trial and error at the moment, but I think we're learning and we're getting used to it more and more, and it's going to become an increasingly powerful tool that we'll rely on more and more. So things have changed quite a lot, but I think the core skills and knowledge that we're using day to day haven't changed. We're just applying them in a different format. And doctors, students, patients, we're all still learning and developing with it.
Okay. So things are changing, and it is about learning how to use new things, which is exactly what we're all trying to do here as well. So thank you, panel, for all those answering all those questions, and thank you to everyone for submitting the questions. I'm going to pass it back to Zain now, our chair.
Thank you guys again. I'm sorry that's all we've got time for in terms of the panel, but I'm just going to hand back over to Peter, who's just going to say a few words, and then we're just going to go to the breakout rooms at the end. So over to you, Peter.
Well, very briefly, just thank you everyone for attending and all your inspiring talks. And I just will put my hand up for global mental health as another speciality. Because you will get a feedback form, and we will be really grateful if you could fill in the feedback form. Time is a little bit short, so are we going to actually have the breakout rooms or have just a little bit more time for questions? I just wondered that, because I don't think there's time for an actually breakout rooms.
I think maybe after you've said everything, Peter, we can just go back to the panel and have a few more questions.
I just think we go back panels, and if that's okay with everyone. And but as we've had such a lot of speakers, and having so many speakers on a Zoom meeting is great. So we'll continue with the panel questions, please.
Okay, so
and I'll keep myself on in case anyone wants to ask me about global mental health.
No problems. Thank you, Peter. So then another question came up, one we had earlier for Rachel, who and one of the attendees was wondering about the impact of self-harm scars on patients. So who'd like to take that?
I could maybe mention, oh, sorry, maybe I could just mention that I've had so many colleagues I've worked with who've had self-harm scars. Some keep them well covered, and the ones who don't keep them well covered, I'm just amazed. I think that's really brave. I really think I'm kind of a bit proud of them. I think good on you. And because they carry their scars openly. We others, we carry our scars internally. But none of us should be afraid to talk about our own struggles and dilemmas and problems. We're human, the same as our patients.
Thank you, Peter. We've got a question from somebody who's asking about what is the greatest stigma associated with being a psychiatrist. So,
shall I jump for that one to start with? Well, there are so many actually, but I think fundamentally, I think Golna might have said it previously, you know, it's still not considered as important as some of the other medical specialties, I don't think. Actually, there's still huge stigma in medical school and across other medical specialties. And so although, as I said, the fill rate for core trainees in England was 100% this time around, which is fantastic, absolutely fantastic, I think there is still an awful lot of stigma around people recognizing its importance. So I think we need to keep really banging that drum rather, for how important it is. And, you know, and globally, there's huge stigma for people around disclosing their mental health and mental health problems. You know, doctors don't reveal their mental illness. It's hidden, people suffer in silence. So there's stigma around mental illness, but there's also a huge stigma around going into psychiatry. So, you know, that story has got to change. And, you know, I really, really hope in our generation, or the next generation, certainly that, you know, psychiatry will be considered probably the pivotal career in medicine. I really hope that happens. I think it might actually. I think it might.
Ooh, I do want to say something about this. So I think this was in Southwest London. There was like a survey on the general public, and 50% of respondents reported that they would feel uncomfortable sitting next to a psychiatrist in a party. And well, I think, as David was saying, social media provides psychiatrists with a fantastic opportunity to engage with the public and to demonstrate that we are the life and soul of parties. And yes, Peter.
If I could just share my own experience, like I'm quite proud to belong to that group of eccentric psychiatrists. And I'm proud of it to be one of those eccentric people. But I do remember when I was going into psychiatry and I was in medicine at the time, and everyone, all the nurses said, okay, good on you, that's great. Yeah, you should do that. And then another of my friends who was more normal, they were saying, why are you going into psychiatry? I think things have changed now, and we're all sorts of people in psychiatry, even people who are a little bit different, maybe like myself.
Yeah. Well, normal is overrated, Peter.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Here's one for David. So what's the life and schedule like as a psychiatrist, and do you have time to disconnect and take time for yourself and explore other interests?
I think, when I've got a group of 5 friends who were like my best friends when we were junior doctors as foundation doctors, and so one of them's a GP, one of them's a surgeon, one of them's an oncologist, and another one is an academic. And so we quite often will meet up and we'll compare our lives. And actually, I feel like my work-life balance is probably one of the better ones. Like, I guess you work 9 to 5 as an absolute generally. You can negotiate flexible kind of hours, especially if you have children. There's lots of people who work part-time, a couple of days a week. Some specialities or subspecialties lend themselves to that slightly more easily. Like liaison psychiatry is quite good for that. As a consultant, you probably will have to do on calls, but you do your on calls from home. Even as an SPR, you'll do the majority of your on calls from home. You might have to go in for emergencies, maybe a couple of times during the course of the evening. But I mean, definitely when I compare my lifestyle, especially during training, to my friends who did like things like core medical training, it was so much better. My issue was because I ended up just saying yes to doing all sorts of other projects, like research or education work, or management projects, because I couldn't say no to stuff. But that was a privilege to have that time at the weekends and the evenings to be able to do those little fun projects. Whereas I think a lot of my friends who did things like core medical training or even GP, like they didn't have a choice. It was just about service delivery. And actually that's the amazing thing about psychiatry. We have so much more opportunity to, I think, to do things like teaching, management, research. We get great supervision. But yeah, the work-life balance, I think it's really good. Mine's terrible, but that's self-inflicted, so.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, guys, to the attendees, we're not going to have time for any other questions. But
Can I quickly just say, I don't know if anyone's mentioned it, but psychiatry is the only specialty that as an SBR you get a day. So as a registrar, you get a day a week to do a special interest. So I've always used it for academia, but my friends have done such incredible things, working with complex trauma, working with refugee charities, working in therapeutic art communities. So in that day, a week, which is a lot, you not only have a break from psychiatry, but you also get to develop, and I've just seen there are loads of questions about how you develop yourself and your other interests, and psychiatry really lends itself to that.
Thank you so much. Just to tie up, just going to ask in one sentence from each of you on the panel in turn, what is the best part of your job as a psychiatrist? So David.
My favorite part of my job is when I see somebody get better and leave hospital. That's the best part.
Thank you. And Gulnar?
My patients, by far. Interesting, diverse, and different every day.
Thank you. Peter?
I think it's undoubtedly when you make a connection with someone and join them in their journey to recovery.
Thank you, Peter. Ahmed?
I mean, everyone's saying, providing care to our patients, and I want to chime in unison with them. But also, I think working with medical students and people like yourself, Zain, and it's a huge pleasure and privilege to be working with you and other medical students and throughout the UK and throughout the world.
Thank you, and likewise. Manraj?
I go into work every day expecting something different. Psychiatry is so unpredictable, challenging and exciting. I go to work looking forward to going in and not knowing what I can encounter. Whilst diagnoses might be the same across patients, their stories are just so completely different, and that's the exciting bit.
Thank you. And Purna?
I'm a strong believer, actually. I think it's never too late to sort of achieve your dreams. So while working with children, I think helping them to achieve their future. So that makes me feel sort of quite content at the end of the day.
Thank you. And finally, Trudy, if you'd like to tie us up, please.
Yeah, I mean, so many things, aren't there? But like yesterday as I left for ward, it's always a clinical thing for me, but nothing makes me happier than seeing a mother, baby and the family going home together. We're fully recovered. That is the ultimate in I guess, job satisfaction for me, amongst all the other myriad and the, a million things that actually make my job really, really amazing as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So that's all we do have time for, unfortunately. I'm sure you can contact the panelists some way or another, and I think some people have put their emails into the chat. And I'd just like to go and thank sorry, just like to thank again all of the panelists for all their work. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I'd like to especially thank all of my colleagues for all their work in putting this together, and everyone at the London Choose Psychiatry Group. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Zain. And thank you to the medical students. Thank you to the fellow
You're
panel speakers. You guys rock.
Thank you very much, guys.